Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the Survivor 43 power rankings following episode 6, which I do consider to be the merge episode. I know they make such a big deal out of the fact that they're not technically merged and how they had to earn the merge, but for all intents and purposes, this is the merge here. And we also saw the way in which they implemented it here, where it was very similar to the hourglass twist from 41 and 42, with them being divided into teams, with the main exception being that we didn't have the hourglass. So it was a pretty straight up challenge. Like whoever won the challenge got immunity, end of story, no questions asked, which I do feel like is better than obviously what we got with the hourglass twist. But even so, I still found it to be a very weird concept of them having to earn the merge when they're all voting at this tribal. So take that as you will. But as usual, there are 13 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 13, we have the boot for this week, and the merge boot of the season. But here we have Ellie, and coming into the episode, Ellie was not my first pick for being the merge boot. I kind of felt like Ryan or Dwight were more likely options, given their edits and their positions coming into the merge. I felt like they could have been relatively easy consensus targets. However, once we got into the episode and once we saw the teams and the challenge results, and once we saw Ryan, Dwight, Noel all become immune through this challenge, I felt like Ellie was the pretty clear consensus target from there. I felt like she was by far the most likely person to be the merge boot of the people who are eligible. And sure enough, that's what ended up happening here. Although not before we saw Ellie once again being overconfident and her overplaying, with her really trying to play both sides here, with her trying to build a super alliance with Baka and Vessi, but also building a mega alliance with Baka and Coco. And once everyone compared notes, coupled with the fact that Gabler really had it out for her, it became very obvious that Ellie was going to be the consensus target, someone who's overplaying, and someone who was just causing too much chaos, and obviously that's what ended up happening here. And on the whole, I felt like Ellie played a very messy game, where despite her having quite a bit of screen time, I felt like she was being constantly undermined, particularly after that first tribal, where despite her having some control early on, with her being in the middle of the tribe, it didn't take long for her to grow her threat level to such an unsustainable level, with people recognizing that she was playing the middle and how she was playing too hard and how she was completely underestimating the guys for a lot of it. And I'm not entirely sure whether Owen would have sided with her had they gone to another tribal. I felt like that would have been very critical for her in terms of her staying, as I felt like Gabler and Sammy were probably going to go after her if they went to another tribal pre-merge, with Owen being the deciding vote there. And I feel like us knowing whether Owen would have sided with her remains to be seen, although based on his vote at this tribal, I would have guessed that he was going to be a bit more loyal to her, but again, we'll find out more in postseason interviews. But all things considered, I felt like she was pretty sloppy at threat management. I felt like she overplayed at points. I felt like she got a bit overconfident at points. And I felt like she was trying things just to be cute, but it just didn't really work out for her. So on the whole, despite her being pretty active, she was a pretty messy player. And because of that, she's here at number 13. And with that, there are 12 players left in the game to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they are to win based on their edit and current game position. But number 12, the person I believe is the least likely to win right now, is actually a new person in this bottom spot compared to previous weeks. But here we have Gabler. And I know people really like Gabler in this episode. I felt like this was a really good episode from him from a character standpoint, with him really getting his revenge on Ellie here and him getting his way. But I feel like that leads into the main reason why he's at the bottom, is that I feel like with Ellie going out here, his story for the season is pretty much wrapped up. I feel like they didn't really do much for him to set him up beyond like just getting out Ellie, given the amount of content he got in the pre-merge, with him targeting Ellie and him like trying to get one up over her. And yes, while he does get his way here, I feel like by Ellie going out this early, I feel like there isn't really much for Gabler at this point in the season. Now, I'm not saying he's guaranteed to be the next boot or anything. However, I feel like now he doesn't really have much of a purpose in the edit. And I feel like he could go one of two ways. One, he could just be the consensus target at the next tribal, as he doesn't really have any allies at this point, I feel like he doesn't really have anyone that's truly willing to stay loyal to him. And especially given how loose he was with information in this round, with him just announcing to everyone that Ellie had searched through his bag, which probably isn't the best sign for him long term. But so through that, I could see him being voted out. Alternatively, I could see him just being dragged to the end as a GOAT. So I feel like that could give him some longevity. But even so, I mean, he's not winning. Regardless, he's not winning this season. And with Ellie going out here, I don't really see what his purpose in the edit is beyond this point. And I feel like with Ellie going out, I feel like that's setting him up to either be the next boot or to be dragged to the end as a GOAT. And either one leads to a loss. I can't really see a world where Gabler wins the game, and because of that, he is here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we have the person who I thought could have been the merge boo coming into this episode, but obviously they won immunity. But here we have Ryan, and as I said, I felt like Ryan seemed a pretty likely merge boo coming into this episode, with him like obviously being on the outs of Coco and him probably trying to flip against Coco only for that to fail. But obviously it wasn't meant to be. He ended up winning immunity. And he even got a decent amount of strategic credit here, with him being the one to loop in a lot of his tribe to Ellie like overplaying, and obviously like putting the target onto Ellie's back, at least from Coco's perspective. So at least he gets that. And plus he does get that confessional early on about how he wants to flip against Coco. But then he also gets plenty of bad content as well, like him announcing to everyone at the merge feast that he wants that to be the final 7, despite the fact that none of these people have really spent too much time together. And obviously there's plenty of people that are against each other, like a Gabler and Janine, and even a Carla who had just voted against him. So I feel like the episode kind of dunked on him there. But realistically, I don't feel like he played the round too terribly. It's just that I feel like the same concerns that I had with him earlier still apply. And I feel like he could still be a boot in the next couple rounds based on his position and based on people potentially seeing him as his challenge threat and someone who isn't really going to be beneficial for their games. So because of that, I can't really see him winning. And sort of similar to Gabler, I feel like his edit isn't really leading to much. So because of that, he is here number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have the person who I had at the bottom of last week's ranking. But here we have Janine. And the main reason I have Janine, at least this high, is I feel like with Ellie being voted out here, I feel like that kind of helps her position moving forward. Where I feel like before, a big reason why I felt like Janine was in a pretty bad position was because of her association with Ellie. And there was a good chance that people could have sniped her out of the game in order to weaken Ellie moving forward. But now that Ellie is out of the game and Janine's kind of on her own, I mean, yes, it's not great that she lost her ally here, but I also feel like it kind of opens the game up for Janine a bit to where she'll probably be less of a target. She could probably maneuver under the radar to a degree, and through that she probably could sneak on by through these next couple rounds. And plus she still has her idol. I feel like she made the correct decision there by holding on to it. But realistically, I don't see her winning the game either. I feel like the edit just isn't there for her to actually win the game. And I feel like her edit is actually kind of similar to, like people from previous seasons, like these women who make deep runs and are probably not the worst players in the world, but just are kind of buried in the edit. People like a Chelsea from Ghost Island, for example. I could see Janine going in that direction where she probably is just in the game for a bit. No one's really going after her. But then around like final 7, final 6, like people just decide to cut her because realistically, what is she doing for their games? So I feel like that's probably the trajectory I see her going on at this point. So while she isn't going to be one of the next few boots, I feel like she isn't being set up to win. And because of that, she is here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9. And we have someone who I thought could have been the merge boot, sort of similar to Ryan. However, they ended up winning immunity. But here we have Dwight. And Dwight got a very quiet edit here. I believe he's the only person that didn't get a single confessional in the merge episode, which, considering that it is the merge episode, is a pretty bad sign for his edit. And I feel like my opinion on Dwight hasn't changed too much. Now, obviously, a lot of his fate in the game will depend on whether the Vesties will be in the majority. To where they aren't, I could see him or Noelle being the next targets here, as he doesn't seem super primed to do well. And plus, I feel like his edit, yes, while it's pretty quiet, I still feel like there's enough there to where he could still be a consensus target, assuming tribal lines sort of fracture along the way. And obviously, a lot of this will also depend on whether his conflict with Jesse will come to a head soon, which I could see happening. And if it happens in the next few rounds, I think Dwight will lose that battle. So I feel like Dwight isn't being set up super well here. And with him having a pretty bad merge episode, him not getting a single confessional, that's enough to have him here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have someone very similar to Dwight, but here we have Noelle. And Noelle was also someone I considered as a possible merge boot. I feel like she got enough content in the pre-merge to justify her being seen as a big target, while also someone who was in a bad enough position game-wise to where they could have been a consensus target. But obviously she wins immunity through her picking the right team. I feel like she picked the right team, as a lot of her allies and a lot of her tribe members ended up being on the winning team. So I feel like she made the right choice there. But sort of similar to Dwight, I feel like her edit here isn't too great. I mean, yeah, she gets some content here and there, but nothing to really prop her up too much. And I still feel like she is in quite a bit of danger from a gameplay perspective, to where if the Vessies do fall the numbers, or if this Jesse conflict comes to a head, I feel like she could potentially be collateral damage for that. So I feel like she isn't being set up to win either. However, I feel like compared to the people we just talked about, I feel like she's a bit more likely, and I feel like she has a slightly stronger case to possibly win. But realistically, I don't think she is. So because of that, she is here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have a player who, again, I feel like could make a deeper run, but probably isn't being set up to win. But here we have Owen. And Owen did have a couple fun moments here. I mean, he got to summarize everyone's advantages, and he even had like a title card that said no advantage. So I feel like the editors are kind of having fun with Owen. But really, this isn't that great of an episode for him. He does ultimately side with Ellie, so he doesn't get his way here. And he doesn't get to explain it super well, which probably is more of a red flag than anything else. And really, with him being on the outs here, it's probably not great. Also, Carla throws a vote onto him, which isn't really explained, but probably doesn't bode well for his chances either, as Carla did probably think that Owen was a playable option, possibly because he was still aligned with Ellie, so that's not great. So on the whole, I feel like this was not a good episode for Owen, which only solidifies him probably not winning the game. But similar to how I feel about Ricard from 41, I still feel like he can make a deep run, only to be taken out later on as a big player. So because of that, he is here number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have a player who did technically get her way by voting the majority. However, they also didn't come off looking the best here. But here we have Cassidy. And I feel like this was not a very good round for Cassidy either. I feel like she didn't really get to talk too much about her game outside of her talking with Ellie about possibly working with her. But then we also saw Ellie like planning to have her as a target at one point between her and Jane, so that's not great. Even Noelle ends up voting for her at Tribal, which again isn't really explained, but doesn't bode well for her position either. And yes, Cassidy does walk away here with her being the majority, and she still has 2 of her closer allies in Jane's and Carla, so I feel like she's probably secure for the time being. But I feel like she didn't really get to explain her game as well as I would have liked. And plus, she technically doesn't get her way in that she did seem a bit more open to keeping Ellie at one point. So because of that, I feel like I had to drop her a bit, though I could see it shifting over time. But for now, I do have her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have a player who I still have in some contention, although I am still a bit underwhelmed by them compared to other players. But here we have James, and he did have a good episode here. He did get a decent amount of strategic content, showing us him saving himself when Ellie tries to target him. We see him saving himself, and we see him getting the Cocos and a lot of the others on their side in order to take out Ellie. Now again, I don't feel like he gets sole credit for it, and actually I would give more credit to other people, although I do feel like James gets a decent amount of credit in terms of him saving himself, and I still feel like he's being set up for a very deep run here. However, I feel like compared to other players, his overall presence has been a bit lacking. I feel like he's been largely invisible given how big of a player he is and how strong of a position he should be in at this point. So with that, I can't have him too much higher than here, and there is a debate for his content here being necessary as well, given he was a target for this episode. But I still was impressed enough by him to have him here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have a player who is sort of in line with how I felt with him before, where I feel like they're being set up for a deep run, but not winning the game. But here we have Jesse, and Jesse got a somewhat muted presence compared to what he could have gotten, but he still got some content. He got some confessionals breaking down the merge, and he obviously later on was shown being the one to pull in the Vessies to this plan, with him saying how it might be the time to strike against Ellie, which obviously comes to pass. And he does end up voting in the majority here, although technically he didn't have a vote. But, like he was on the side where the numbers were. So there's that. So I still feel like he is being set up for a deep run here. However, again, I feel like it's a bit too prominent. I feel like he's probably not going to win, and he's probably going to be seen as this big target moving forward, not to mention his whole conflict with Dwight that could come to a head. And while I do feel like he'll win that battle, I feel like by the end he might end up losing the war. So because of that, I have him here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have someone very similar to Jesse, but here we have Carla. And honestly, I did consider putting Carla below Jesse, as we never get an explanation for her vote for Owen. She does throw a vote onto Owen, and while you can explain that by trying to counter a shot in the dark play, and her thinking that Owen would be on Ellie's side for this vote, which is correct, she never really gets to highlight it. Now, to be fair, she could just explain it at the beginning of the next episode, and that would be fine. But I still feel like my view of Carla hasn't changed too much. She got a somewhat consistent presence here, getting to break down the merge to a degree, although not as much as someone else will be talking about in a moment. And I feel like she is being set up for another deep run. But similar to Jesse, I feel like her edit is too perfect. I feel like she is too blatantly set up as the player who is going to be the big obstacle for the eventual winner to take out. And through that, I can't put her at the very top because of that. But again, I feel like when we have so many people with flawed edits, I feel like I have to at least acknowledge that her edit has been strong up to this point, and that there is a possibility that she could be in for a long haul and be a big player along the way. So with all that, I did decide to leave her here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2. And honestly, I feel like this player, wasn't too exceptional overall in their edit, but they did have at least one good moment from this episode that does make them in somewhat strong contention for me. But here we have Cody. Now, honestly, the main reason I have him at least this high of this week's ranking is because of his confessional after we see the tries come together. He does get to break down the merge to a degree. And yes, while we did see Owen talking about everyone's advantages, Cody at least got the content of saying how the merge is a different stage of the game and how he needs to start thinking more strategically, which I do feel like is a pretty big boon for his edit. And considering that there are so many other people with flaws in their edit and people like Carla whose edit is too perfect, I feel like Cody is someone who definitely has an edit that's strong enough to make him a top contender, but also someone who isn't overshadowing anyone to where they were too blatant of a winner. But there are still plenty of pitfalls for Cody. We did see his a relationship with Carla and how Carla could be setting up this battle with him. And who knows, maybe Cody could be the one to take out Carla by the end of it. And again, justify my argument that whoever votes out Carla or whoever gets the credit for voting out Carla will win the game. But there's still plenty of uncertainty surrounding his edit to where I can't have him at the very top, but I still feel like he is a serious contender, and because of that, he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 43 right now is Sammy. And honestly, I don't feel like my opinion of Sammy has really gone up in this episode. We did see some good content from him. He did get to share plenty of strategic content during the scramble. He does get a decent amount of credit for the Ellie move, where he is obviously one who is able to get a lot of the Bakas on his side for that vote. But really, as I said earlier, I feel like a bunch of people probably should get some credit for the move. Gabler was the one with the initial bitterness against her. We did see Jesse pulling the Vessies. We did see James trying to save himself as well. We even saw Ryan being the one to leak the information about what Ellie is doing. So I feel like, the whole credit thing is a bit up in the air, and really it was more of a consensus vote anyway. But Sammy does still get some credit. He does talk about how, he does get to narrate a lot of the situation. He's worried about how Gabler, leaking all this information could come back to bite him. he is the first one to consider the idea of voting out Ellie in this round, even as like we see them considering targeting James or Cody in this case. So there's that. And I still feel like he's being set up for a very deep run. And at this point, I feel very secure in him potentially getting towards the end game here. Now, there's still the question of whether he can win. And I guess for me, a big thing is still waiting to see whether he is going to get the credit for like certain moves or whether he's going to get certain flaws along the way. Now, the one concern I have for him is if we are assuming that whoever gets the most credit for voting out Carla wins the game, will win the game, then Sammy has not been set up for a relationship with Carla at this point. I feel like Cody has been set up for a relationship with Carla. And through that, I could see that being a knock against Sammy as well. And really, it's not as if Sammy's edit has been perfect up to this point either, but it's just the fact that I feel like he probably is one of the least downsides to potentially being voted out soon, while also being someone who could get the storyline to win the game under certain situations. I feel like that is enough to have him at least at number 1 for this week. Although realistically, I could see other people passing him if we see stuff happen down the road. But for now, I did decide to leave him here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings once again, so stay tuned for that. I'm also covering the Amazing Race 34 right now and doing power rankings for that as well, so be sure to check those out. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave with the join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.